We began a study of the Ten Commandments last Lord's Day, making application of all of them with the exception of the fourth commandment to the Christian system. And turn to Exodus, the 20th chapter, that we might study these commandments as they were revealed to Moses on the Mount of Sinai by the hand of God, as he had written them in the tables of stone for the children of Israel. The fourth commandment, of course, is that of remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy, which does not have any application either immediately or otherwise to the gospel of Christ and the Christian system. It was a unique day and is not paralleled by or is not synonymous with the Lord's Day, the first day of the week in the New Testament order at all. But the other 9 commandments have direct bearing on our relationship with God and with mankind. Therefore, there are several commands, the first 4, that are given in direct reference to our duty to Jehovah, and the last 6 in reference to our relationship one with another in the social, civil lives that we find ourselves living in this world. And they have very definite applications showing the dominion of God, showing the fact that we are accountable unto God, and showing that he is well aware of the makeup of man. He is aware of the failings and the faults within us. He is aware of our attitudes toward him and others. He is aware of how we breach responsibility, and he is aware of the thinking processes that go on when we endeavor to justify ourselves in things that are wrong or overly commend ourselves in the things that are right. He knows all about us. And these commandments get to the very center of our being and our spirit and reveal us to ourselves when we study them carefully. Thou shalt have no other gods before me is the first of the commandments, and that established, as we noted, that God is aware that man can make another god. Unreal though it be, man can make another god. And therefore thou shalt have no other gods before me. In the second commandment, thou shalt not make any graven images, that is, likenesses of the one true and living God, Jehovah Almighty. That we do not need signs and symbols or relics or any sort of a physical, fleshly, or carnal gadget to remind us of God. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. There isn't any physical, temporal, or carnal, or fleshly thing that we could devise from the very height of the genius of man that in any manner at all comes near resembling or bringing into the consciousness of man the being of God. It's an impossibility. He is described as holy. He is described as all-wise. He is described as pure and just. He is absolute in his love and his mercy and his grace. He is aware of all things and powerful to the degree that all things come from him. And these traits of God, these characteristics of the Almighty One, cannot be physically imaged. There isn't any way that we could create a likeness of holiness, purity, justice, love, grace, or mercy, providence, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. These things cannot be given in any sort of a relic, any sort of an image, and convey that idea to man's heart. It's an impossibility, because they are characteristics, concepts, and traits that are not physically seen or represented. They're spiritual. And in reference to God, they are divine. That brings us to the third commandment of Exodus chapter 20 and verse 7. Remembering that God is giving these commandments to Israel after he had delivered them from the bondage in Egypt. They have already crossed the Red Sea. They have been saved from that enslavement. And now he covenants them with these words of the Ten Commandments. And we've noted the first two. The third, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Sometimes men will say that God speaks with ambiguity. Absolutely not. Sometimes he does speak in a manner in which he includes more than one emphasis in a single statement. And man, if he isn't able of defining the two distinct statements, thinks that God is making a generic statement, an ambiguous one that can go in more than one direction and still be accurate. Man speaks ambiguously. Man speaks covertly. Man speaks seductively. Man speaks deceptively. Man will cover his words. He will use generic terms in order to make some sort of an accusation or a commendation. It can go in either way, in a manner that is not particular, in a manner that is not specific. It doesn't address a situation. It deals with general, universal ideas, so ambiguously stated that it can be taken in either way. Remember, in the Bible, there were certain prophets and seers or wise men who were counselors to the kings of old and would tell them in an ambiguous way when that they would be sought for advice as to whether or not they would be victorious in war. You remember that one particular instance in which the seer told the king, who was very reprobate, that it was going to be a great and memorable day in his life when he met another king in battle? Now that's an ambiguous statement. It could mean I'm either going to be so victorious I'll go down in history as the greatest conqueror of all. And that's the way he took it. It meant otherwise. It's the day of your death and the destruction of your kingdom. And God doesn't speak with ambiguity. The ambiguity that is thought to be in the third commandment is, does this mean do not perjure yourself, tell a lie in court? Or does it mean that we should not use the name of God in vain? It means both. It means both. When we turn over in our Bible just a little to Leviticus, look at the 19th chapter, and there in verse 12, a little later we find that the law is being read to the people of Israel. And naturally when Moses began to, let's say, preach the law, he amplified it. That is, Moses did with the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, what the apostles did with the kernels or the short statements of Jesus in the Gospels. As Jesus went about teaching in the parables, he would give many a thought and never really bring it out to its conclusion or its absolute illustration and application. Many times he would give a grand principle of the kingdom and never make application of it at all. An instance of that is very familiar is when Nicodemus came to Jesus by night in the 3rd chapter of John, and Jesus said to him, "Except a man be born again of water and of the Spirit, he'll not enter the kingdom." He did not clarify it. He did not amplify it. He did not make full illustration of it, and he certainly did not make a complete application of it. That was done by Peter and the others of the apostles on the day of Pentecost, when they began to preach the gospel, and sinners came for baptism, and the remission of sins was seen to be the result of faith and obedience by baptism into the name of Jesus Christ, and the church was established in the 2nd chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. Now we find that Moses in Leviticus is literally amplifying, clarifying, and communicating the entire meaning of the 10 Commandments unto the people of Israel. And here in Leviticus 19 and in verse 12 he said, "Ye shall not swear by my name falsely." That's perjury. That's perjury. "Neither shall ye profane the name of thy God. I am Jehovah." And that's a vain or empty use of the name of God. A vain application of it. An empty, hollow application of the name of God. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus carries it one step further. For, under the law, certain Pharisees, scribes, and others, deeming themselves to be wise above all other men in the exercise of the law, and in the understanding of the law, began to make statements and write in their writings decisions and limitations of the application of the law. And they began to realize, when Jesus said something about it, that they had carried their expertise of cutting things down to a fine wire far too far. Because they had on this 3rd commandment, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain," said that they could swear by heaven, by the throne, by the hair of their head, etc., etc. But Jesus said, "Not so. Not so." There's something in this commandment that is going to strike at the very center of the being of God and focus our attention on Him in a way that a lesson dealing with reverence and veneration and honor is brought out in the most worshipful, adoring manner possible. For Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says that there is more to this matter of boldness in speaking than calling down the name of heaven or the throne or the hair of your head or these other things that he mentions that men would use as an empty oath, but endeavoring to keep from using the name of God in reference to that oath. So Leviticus 19 and 12 says there are two sides to the commandment. It applies to both. That we must not perjure ourselves in a civil court situation. We have taken the oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as is the standard in our country, when we are sworn in a court situation. And therefore let the testimony be an absolute statement of truth, an emptying of the heart of the things that are so, the facts as they are, with no contamination by our imagination, with no pollution by any idea of theory or any such speculative thing, but rather that which I have seen and that which I have heard is here conveyed as I saw it, as it was heard. This is it. And Jesus says, therefore, let your speech be yea, yea, nay, nay. Let it be bold with the truth, and let it be nothing but the truth. In John, Jesus said in chapter 8, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." All that God deals with centers in an absolute of truth. Take all of mankind and all of the diversity, and it focuses down to a fine point called truth. And the lie, anything outside that arena of truth, is to the destruction of man and the irreverence of God. That veneration of God is lost the instant I accept an error, a falsehood, or the lie. Veneration for God is lost the instant that I promote an error, preach an untruth, or teach or state a lie, one to another, whether it's public or private, in the telling of a falsehood. This destroys the integrity of God in the hearts of men. And when that integrity is destroyed, then we no longer have use for God. And that is where irreverence comes in. When we become irreverent toward God, we become blasphemers of God. We can speak against him. And we can use his name in empty and in hollow ways. And therefore it is this point that the cardinal doctrine of the Bible in relation to God and man is that cardinal virtue called truth. Truth. Nothing less. Nothing more. No substitutes for it. No pollutants within it. But truth. Is it so? Later, Paul will write to the Colossians saying, "Brethren, lie not one to another." Of the people of the earth most aware of truth, of all the people of this world most dependent on truth, of all the people of all of the world who have the highest regard for truth, it's the children of God. And yet Paul has to caution us, "Brethren, lie not one to another." Because this destroys on the part of the liar faith, sincerity, truth, veneration for God, brotherly love, the integrity of the church, the worship of Christ. Destroys it all. And impugns the integrity of the one lied to, that they will accept the lie. Brethren, lie not one to another. It is a forbidden crime. When we come to the 9th commandment, we have something that is near kin to the 3rd. For here it is that perjury is involved with the 3rd commandment, and outright lying, false witness, in the 9th commandment. Why do you suppose that the use of the tongue, our speech, and our awareness of truth or denial of truth, allowing us to speak falsely, is mentioned twice in the 10 Commandments, and no other command is so regarded. No other command is duplicated or emphasized in that way. And it's because that so many have failed to put the harness on the tongue. Or so many have not grown to be lovers of truth to the point that they will speak the truth and only the truth. Oh, you thought the 3rd commandment just meant don't cuss. Sorry. I'm sorry. It involves all these other things we've just discussed. And it shows irreverence to God, or is a vain use of the honor that God has right to when we speak falsely. It's not just the empty use of the name of God, it is the false use of the very power of speech that God gave us before God. For He hears. He hears these things. He's quite aware. When Christ spoke, truthfulness was being undermined by all of these distinctions that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were making. And for that reason, He comes down in the Sermon on the Mount, both on the side of perjury and on the side of the empty use of the name of God, to try to prove that what I'm saying to you is so. Now later Paul will speak of these things. He said something you will remember over in the epistles one time when he was under fire for some sort of a thing that the world and the brethren were accusing of him. And he says, before God I lie not. Before God I lie not. And that's the proper use of the command. That's the proper relationship of an individual to God. That's a proper relationship of an individual to another individual. Before God, I lie not. These studies over the years, along with hearing others preach on it and teach on it and discuss it, have led me to a conclusion that others have reached before me. Namely, there is no authority in Christianity save that authority or power of being right. The truth shall prevail. That's what this command is establishing, that the truth is in God. And before God, Paul says, I lie not. Before God, I lie not. Or I call God to witness upon my soul. Or God is my witness whom I serve in my spirit and in the gospel of His Son. That makes me a truth lover, a truth speaker. If I am aware that God is my witness. And the witness takes on two sides, doesn't he? The witness observes and the witness relates. Therefore, God as my witness, Paul is saying, there are two things I'm bringing to your attention that God is my witness means. He observes my conduct and speech, and He will give the testimony as to that conduct and speech. Two sides to it. And therefore, that means I am so aware of being answerable to God that I can neither withhold truth from you, nor misrepresent truth to you, nor speak the lie to you, publicly or privately. Paul says, God as my witness. It will not be that way. Profanity is a unique little matter, and not little. People view profanity in a strange or weird manner. 100 years ago, a scholar wrote that it was a strange thing that profanity against God did not become a contemptible thing until it was not acceptable in the parlor. That's going back to get an ancient, 100 years. Get an attitude from a generation 100 years ago. And isn't that a rather contemptible thing? Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. When we think that polite people are not hearing us be profane, that scholar said, we are profane, irrespective of the fact that God hears it. And when we became aware that people were upset with profanity, we were less profane, or abandoned it entirely for the sake of the politeness of society, not out of reverence to God. That makes us search the heart too, doesn't it? That makes us search the heart too. And therefore reverence is at the core of the third command. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Command number 1. Number 2, thou shalt make no graven images of the Lord Jehovah thy God. Number 3, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. He is building the case for reverence, that there should be an elevating of God to the very degree that there is none other like unto him, for indeed there is none like unto him. He is Jehovah. It is from him that we have come. Physically, we are children of God. The seed of life is by his power. And since it is that we are able to lose reverence for God, man has always been able to lose reverence for man. For we've all come from God. But it doesn't make any matter, any difference to the irreverent against God that he is irreverent, discourteous to man, that he cannot respect man. For if we cannot respect the God from whom life has come, we will not respect that one whose life as well came from God and is just to us another human being, another man, another woman. I noted down something that I read from this scholar of 100 years ago. These things date to 1896, so that's just one year short of 100. And he said this: there has been of late years a marked decay of the spirit of reverence. Religious authority, rank, gray hairs, the parental relation, none of these command the reverence once yielded ungrudgingly to them. I wonder what he would say now. In an earlier day, when society was neither as cultivated, sophisticated, or as proud as it is now, in a day before there was a definite emphasis on humanism and all of the errors that it entails to destroy the spiritual concept of a great man and reduce the concept of man's greatness to humanism, where that there is a destruction of any allegiance to God, an absolute animosity toward mama and daddy, and a destructive force against civil authorities, and there is crime and violence in the streets, that what's yours is yours only if you can keep me from taking it from you. In a day before all of this occurred with such an onslaught, sober thinkers, reverent to God, were scared to death of society's failings. and the repudiation of God, the repudiation of the men of God, the repudiation, as he says, of the gray head, where that wisdom and experience grants and natural leadership. And loss of respect for parents, to whom we owe more than all of life itself. A marked decay of the spirit of reverence is the way that he put it. And he says it was once yielded to these leaders, the men of God, the parents, the teachers, the authorities. It was once yielded to them ungrudgingly. But you know why Daddy gets so tight and tough? Do you know why the authorities become tyrants? Do you know why the elders can become dogmatists? Do you know why teachers can become ogres? By the loss of respect. They know where they're going, they know why they are going, and they know how to get there. And they're trying to teach the youngers and show the youngers the way to the greatness of life. But with the lack of respect, there is death. For you can't communicate. Where there is lack of respect, there is death. So I'm not going to browbeat this morning. I try not to do that. But if the spirit of reverence for God cannot be resurrected in the lives of the Christian community today, we will continue to go further in destroying the respect of religious leaders, destroying the respect for educators, destroying the respect for the men of God, destroying respect for the gray head, destroying respect for parental responsibility. And where respect is destroyed, death follows. I'll give you one illustration to prove the point. Today there is no respect for the old man, the old woman. And unless our society is turned around quickly, every one of us here who expect to live out the rest of the span of our life will in that time see euthanasia brought to law. There's already no respect for the babe in the womb, and 1.5 million of them are destroyed each year. Where there is no respect, there is death. And if you can't respect God, it will be hell. I'm not going to say death. It will be hell. And that's why it is that the lack of respect is, as an ancient scholar again stated, quoting him, damning and damnable. That's the only words that we have in the English language strong enough to convey the outcome of no reverence for God. Damning and damnable. So it is. So it is. One text from Ecclesiastes pulls this together, I think, for us. God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore, let thy words be few. Who do we think we are anyway to outshout God? You see, that's the blasphemy of irreverence. God is in heaven, thou upon the earth. Therefore, let thy words be few. Reverence in life, reverence in study of the Word, reverence in worship. Can't even get to that and touch it. But you see, the purpose of worship is not to come here to greet one another. The purpose of worship here is not to gather up on the events of last week. The purpose of worship is not to shower accolades one on another. The purpose of worship is not who is preaching. The purpose of worship is not who's running the church. The purpose of worship is to commonly bestow adoration on God in reverence for His name. The poet said, "Lo, God is here. Let us adore and own how dreadful is this place. Let all within us feel His power, and silent bow before His face." Do we realize the presence of God in worship? Thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord God in vain. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Do you revere God enough to hear His word? Do you revere Him enough to believe His word? Do you revere Him enough to obey His word? Let us stand. Let us sing.